oral forms of tobacco. Those are tobacco products, but no one in this room has proposed banning the use of smokeless tobacco in restaurants and bars.
I believe it was twisted a little bit. That statement that was read from TVECA was made in reference to not allowing e-cigarette use to underage people, was nothing to do with indoor use.
Also, to quote one person at one organization, as an industry, that the industry says this or the industry says that. One of the beauties of the e-cigarette industry is that it's so widespread. There's hundreds of e-cigarette makers and marketers. Until big tobacco takes over, there's no spokesperson for the e-cigarette industry who could be said to be authoritative.
And God willing, big tobacco, and thanks to a whole lot of people in this room who use advanced products, big tobacco won't be taking over this market anytime soon.
Thank you, Councilmember. We've been joined by Councilmember Rosie Mendez from the committee. Councilmember Gennaro?
Yes, hi. Just getting back to the point about the Tobacco Vapor Electronic Cigarette Association. Looked at their website. They are international. They appear to me to be the largest organized entity that speaks on behalf of the industry. And the quote that you attribute to Mr. Kickless as saying that it was only about people under 18. I mean, this was said in response to my bill. When the Associated Press talked to him about that bill, he said, I quote, it was reported in the AP, in the Wall Street Journal, it has been meaning the Tobacco Vapor Electronic Cigarette Association, it has been our position that e-cigarettes should be regulated as a tobacco product. My question is, have you reached out to this association to tell them to stop saying that?
No, because Thomas Kickless has repeatedly said that they support FDA regulating e-cigarettes like a tobacco product. They support adding e-cigarettes to youth access laws for tobacco products. But Kickless, as well as myself, have been interviewed repeatedly for different news stories. I've been misquoted before. I've had quotes attributed to me that were.
So you're saying that you're saying that the Associated Press and the Wall Street Journal misquoted Mr. Kickless, and
yes.
that he did not say. It's been our position that e-cigarettes should be regulated as a tobacco product. You're saying he didn't say that?
Mr. Kickless may have said that they support being regulated like a tobacco product, but again, Mr. Kickless does not support banning e-cigarettes wherever smoking is banned.
That's what he said when they asked him about my bill. This is what he said. He said that it's been our position that e-cigarettes should be regulated as a tobacco product, and you could dance all you want from the other end of that table, but that's what he said. That's on the record. That's what the AP has, and that's what the Wall Street Journal has.
Tobacco is
so
also
you should take it up with Thomas Kickless, who purports to represent a broad spectrum, an international consortium of very big players in this whole international marketplace, and indicate to him that perhaps he should stop saying that, and you have a different viewpoint.
He was talking about smoke-free tobacco products, and he probably should have said smoke-free tobacco products. He did not say cigarettes.
He was interviewed about my bill, and that's what he said in response to my bill. No matter what you say, it's just not going to change that fact.
Okay, he did not say cigarettes. He said tobacco products.
Okay, given that time out. We're not going to go back and forth. The individual quoted is not present to dispute or support Councilmember Gennaro's position. So
Fine.
Councilmember, please.
Yep.
I'm just going to say that I'm going to make every effort to call Mr. Kickless, and I will ask somebody who else is coming up to speak to make his position clear, because I can assure you that Tveca, which, by the way, only represents about 1 or 2% of the U.S. market, I can guarantee you that Tveca does not support adding e-cigarettes to the New York City.
When you go on their website, they say that e-cigarettes are tobacco. That's what they say. Go to their website right now. Look up their website right now and see what that association says about this product. It says, we are tobacco.
With all due respect, sir, smokeless tobacco is also tobacco. So where is your bill to ban smokeless tobacco wherever smoking is banned?
Don't give us any
If
idea.
someone, first of all, I do not.
Wait.
I'm not here to answer questions. I'm here to ask questions.
Councilmember, please. I'm asking that we have this conversation respectfully on both both sides. So,
But it's important that the truth not be distorted.
I appreciate that. So,
And anyone else that comes up here that purports to speak for Thomas Kickless, I'm looking at the Associated Press and at the Wall Street Journal. Anyone else that comes up here and says that I just spoke to Thomas Kickless, I'm going to disregard that testimony because that's how it was reported.
Absent of him coming here and making a statement, everything is hearsay.
Fine.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Councilmember Gennaro?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. We
you.
value your opinion and welcome the conversation. Thank you for taking the time. Our next panel, Neil Schluger, World Lung Foundation. If I didn't say that right, I apologize. Lucy Popova, University of California, San Francisco. Michael Devoli, American Cancer Society, and Robin Vitali, American Heart Association. Okay, and on deck, Michael Shannon, David Graham, David Schwartz, and I think is Gaddis, Gaddis. I can't make out your first name, so be ready for the next panel. Okay. I think you've done this before, so let's proceed. Thank you for being here, and flip a coin, ladies first, whatever makes you happy.
Madam Chair, committee members, my name is Lucy Popova, and I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the University of California, San Francisco, where I have been doing research on e-cigarettes. E-cigarettes are a new product on the market, but the science is emergent, and there is science to back up 2 points that I'm going to make today. First, we have evidence that as e-cigarettes are used on a population level, they're not effective smoking cessation devices. And second, e-cigarettes emissions are not harmless water vapor. In our study with a nationally representative sample of 1,800 U.S. smokers that we published in the American Journal of Public Health, we found that smokers who used e-cigarettes were less likely to be successful quitters than those who haven't tried e-cigarettes. And 2 other studies tracked smokers over time and found similar results. How can the findings from these studies be reconciled with individual stories and anecdotes you're going to hear today saying that e-cigarettes help people quit? Well, for every person in here, you have 1 or more people out there for whom e-cigarettes inhibited from quitting. But the main reason why e-cigarettes should be prohibited from using in places where smoking is not allowed is that e-cigarettes emissions are not harmless water vapors. And there are studies out there and more coming. Lots of universities around the country. University of California, San Francisco is one of them. Recently, FDA funded 14 tobacco control research centers around the country where they're doing research. And those studies show that e-cigarettes emissions contain harmful chemicals such as formaldehyde, acetaldehyde, acetone, and others. And it's true that they're less than regular cigarettes, but compared to nicotine inhalers, it's higher in e-cigarettes. Second, e-cigarettes emissions contain fine and ultra-fine particles, also called nanoparticles. And the problem with those particles is that they can penetrate in the deepest reaches of the lung and then from there go into bloodstream and affect central nervous system and potentially can cause increased risk of disease and death. And finally, e-cigarette exhaust, including secondhand vapor, does contain nicotine. And studies show that secondhand vapors have level of blood nicotine about the same as secondhand smokers. So clearly, innocent bystanders, including people with medical conditions, pregnant women, and nicotine affects fetuses at a greater rate, children and health workers, people in occupational places who can't escape will be exposed to all those harmful chemicals. And so I encourage you to take this. It's a sensible piece of legislation that over 100 municipalities have taken, and 3 states, and it's a reasonable thing to do.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Dr. Neil Schluger. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer of World Lung Foundation, which is based here in New York City. We're engaged in tobacco control and other lung health activities around the world. I'm here to testify that electronic cigarettes should be included in the protections afforded by the New York City Smoke-Free Air Act. One of the biggest public health benefits of the Smoke-Free Air Act is that it has denormalized smoking in public, and that has contributed enormously to an overall reduction in smoking, especially among youth, and has helped to cause a longer lifespan for the average New Yorker. In fact, there are recent data that indicate that residents of New York City have the lowest lung cancer death rate of all the people who live in New York State, and that's a great benefit for the Smoke-Free Air Act. And e-cigarette companies, I think, are taking actions that threaten to reverse this trend. Not unlike the strategies that are used to market traditional cigarettes, these companies glamorize smoking behavior and threaten to undermine the tremendous public health gains that have been made, especially among young people in New York. Essentially, e-cigarette companies are selling nicotine addiction. As has been pointed out previously, if these companies wanted to develop smoking cessation devices, they could have done that. They could have developed a plan of research and development and gone to the FDA and said, we have smoking cessation devices. They have not chosen to do that. They are selling nicotine addiction. And nicotine itself can have powerful negative effects on the cardiovascular system, including high blood pressure, abnormal heart rhythms. In women, nicotine reduces circulating estrogen levels, has been linked to early menopause, prenatal exposure, has been linked to obesity, diabetes, high cholesterol, and high blood pressure in children. There's a great deal, as you've heard, that we still don't know about e-cigarettes and their potential harm. Scientific testing indicates that they vary greatly in the amount of nicotine they produce. There are no standards for manufacturing, and there are no restrictions on other chemicals that might be included in the devices. In addition, we can't exclude the risk of adverse health effects generated by secondhand exposure to e-cigarettes, as you've just heard. There's been relatively little research on this issue. I think the facts we know would certainly give me pause. The assumption that something is safe is not an assumption I would like to make. 70 years ago, doctors advertised cigarettes as being healthful products. That was in the absence of any evidence. Most worrying is the marketing of these things to children, the increased uptake of e-cigarettes among middle school and high school students. While the vaping industry claims it's not marketing to children, I think we're familiar, all of us, with recent CDC data that indicates that a large number of children have already tried e-cigarette products, and that's extremely dangerous as well. So our strong recommendation to the New York City Council is to continue its leadership in this area in public health by including e-cigarettes in this legislation.
Chairman Arroyo, members of the Health Committee, and all your colleagues here today, my name is Michael DeVoli. I am the Legislative Campaign Director for the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. I would just like to first of all thank all of you for giving us a chance to speak to you today, and thank all of the Council and New York City in general for its work in the past decade when it comes to tobacco production. As you know, this past March we celebrated the 10-year anniversary of the Smoke-Free Air Act. Every single year in New York State, over 9,000 people lose their lives to smoking-related illness. We simply cannot go back. And the smoke-free air laws are one of the most effective tools we have in preventing tobacco use and preventing smoking use in this state. We have made dramatic progress in a decade, and we simply cannot go back. The Cancer Society is supporting this legislation for a few very specific reasons. One, the simple fact that there just is not the research out there to know whether or not these products are safe. One of the studies that has been mentioned in here today, the CDC study, in that study, one of the things that they found in some of these chemicals was the same chemical makeup that you find in antifreeze. So I just want to mention that, and I actually have the reference in my testimony to show you exactly where that came from. There simply is not enough research one way or the other to say whether or not these products are safe. Secondly, marketing. These products are being marketed to our children. Bubblegum flavors, candy flavors, all you have to do is go online or walk in any store and you'll see them clearly marketed with all of the flavors that the tobacco industry used for 50 years to hook our kids. There's no question about that. And if we do not get on top of this now, those numbers are going to continue. This legislation, I just want to emphasize one important point. This legislation will not ban the use of electronic cigarettes. I feel like we're getting a message that's coming across here that you will simply not be allowed to use them anymore. All it does is say that these products must be regulated in the same way that tobacco use is regulated in New York City. If you can't smoke a cigarette somewhere, you can't use an electronic cigarette. It's a very straightforward approach. The tobacco industry has been marketing towards our kids for years. They're trying to hook another generation here. We've heard about small tobacco or small e-cigarette companies. I just want to conclude by showing you a couple numbers. According to Wells Fargo Securities, by 2023, Altria Group will have over $5.2 billion in e-cigarette sales. Lorillard, $5.8 billion, and Reynolds American, $5.2 billion in e-cigarette sales in the next decade. This is not about small manufacturers. This is about a big tobacco finding another way of hooking our kids.
Don't ruin it, Michael. We're on a roll.
That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Robin?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to all the members of the Council Committee. The American Heart Association has been honored to stand with you for the past 10 years as our city government has really been a champion in promoting public health, especially as it relates to the prevention of heart disease and stroke, which is, of course, my passion particularly. Based upon your legacy as a champion for public health, it's appropriate, in our opinion, that the Council should turn your attention to this burgeoning trend of electronic cigarette use and the possible impact that it could have on the enforcement of the existing law, as well as encouraging continued tobacco addiction in our city. We talk about the idea that these products will often mimic the traditional cigarette. Just sitting here in this room and seeing the puffs of vapor being emitted into the air has caused myself moments of confusion and concern, and I can't imagine what that must be like on a busy Friday or Saturday evening in some of our restaurants or bars. I think that alone really helps to crystallize where this concern lies. In addition, there have been numerous misleading comments made about the presumed safety of e-cigarettes. These devices are often marketed as safe alternatives to smoking with little impact on the user. These claims have not been substantiated by any public health authority in our nation. The American Heart Association supports the regulation of these products by the FDA and looks forward to the growth of scientific knowledge that can be achieved by such oversight. It's important to reference a lot of the other tobacco products that have been referenced by the opposition are being regulated by the FDA and therefore have standards that must be met as a result of that regulation. Regardless, as we currently know very little about the long-term effects of using e-cigarettes, we believe it's entirely necessary for the Council to alter the city's law to restrict the use of these products indoors. Most recently, the results of the National Youth Tobacco Survey yielded some very alarming news. Researchers from the CDC found that the percentage of high school students who had used e-cigarettes doubled in just 1 year, from 4.7% in 2011 to 10% in 2012, the most recent data that's available. This troubling reality should heighten our concern, as the CDC also confirms in this research that 90% of our nation's smokers begin during their teenage years. Additionally, the Youth Tobacco Survey also showed that 1 in 5 middle school students have used e-cigarettes without ever using a tobacco product. The data speaks to the potential for e-cigarettes to serve as a gateway mechanism for future nicotine addiction. Lastly, the results don't indicate that e-cigs are steering kids away from tobacco use, as more than 76% of middle and high school students who used e-cigarettes in the past 30 days have also smoked an actual cigarette during that time. It's important to note that just recently, yesterday, Dr. Frieden was here in the city and participated in the Population Health Summit, and he was asked specifically about electronic cigarettes, and he cited that he feels they are most dangerous when they incite young people to start using them, when it makes it more difficult for adults to quit their nicotine addiction entirely, and when smokers use both products, as well as how they have the potential to glamorize smoking in general. Thank you.
Councilmember Vallone.
Thank you. So there's two doctors. I missed your when you introduced yourself. Are you Dr. Popova? Yes. In the middle? Okay. And the Cancer Association, American Cancer Association, and lung? Heart. Okay. Very compelling, as compelling as the testimony that came before you. I have read all the studies, not all of them, but some that have found the formaldehyde and the nicotine in the vapor. And the ones that say it's safe. I think it comes down to, do we regulate a product before all the facts are in? And you have to weigh the dangers of big government overregulation against the mistakes made in the past when it comes to asbestos and lead paint and fluoride. So I wanted to know what you thought about a ban that would not go as far as a cigarette ban. I think many people don't want flavored vapor, harmless or not, in a restaurant. But I don't think anybody cares at a beach or a park or places like that. Is there anything? Is there any sort of ban less than that is being proposed that you would support or have an opinion on? Anyone?
I would say, Councilman, one of the great effects of the Smoke-Free Indoor Air Act in New York has been the denormalization of smoking. And that's another way that people are being protected. They're being protected by not inhaling secondhand smoke, but they're also being protected because cigarette smoking is come to be seen as socially unacceptable behavior in New York, and that has benefited the people of New York City greatly. As I mentioned, and other speakers have mentioned, people in New York are living longer, they're less likely to die of lung cancer than people in other parts of New York State. And so if all of a sudden it looks like people are in the park and on the beach and in the movie theater and in the bowling alley smoking whatever they're smoking, I think there's a grave danger of reversing that trend.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. We value your participation in this conversation and your leadership and the work that you do. Thank you very much for being here. And you're a long way from home. Thank you for taking the time to be here.
Thank you.
The next panel, Michael Shannon. I think that's Blue E-cigarettes. And if I mispronounce your name, you'll correct it for the record for me, please, and I apologize. David Graham. Another David Schwartz. David. And Gabis, whose first name I cannot make out, I apologize. What is it? Jesse. Okay, welcome. On deck, in favor, Kevin O'Flaherty, Michael Steelback, Sheila Feinberg, Karen Bloomsfield, and Kara Murphy. Give me this one. Okay. Okay, gentlemen, begin when you're ready.
There we go. Thank you. I am Michael Shannon, and I am testifying on behalf of Blue Ecigs, a leading e-cigarette company in the country. This proposal is part of a larger debate that often confuses important distinctions between combustible cigarettes and electronic cigarettes. E-cigarettes contain no tobacco, produce a water vapor, have no combustion, and therefore no ash, no tobacco smoke, and no unpleasant smell or noxious fumes for bystanders. Recently, Mitch Zeller, head of the FDA Center for Tobacco Products, called e-cigarettes very interesting. He added, "You can look at them in the abstract from a harm perspective and say, if it's not tobacco if it's not combusting, then does it make sense to look at it as something that might be potentially less harmful? Making less harmful products available to smokers as soon as possible should be a top priority. For too many years, tobacco policy has been mired in an all-or-nothing philosophy. Under this approach, smokers are presented with just one alternative: quit. This attitude has hindered the implementation of a public health strategy designed to reduce tobacco-related disease. E-cigarettes are likely much less harmful than combustible cigarettes, and regulatory action should treat e-cigarettes as separate and distinct from traditional combustible cigarettes. Proposals that equate the two products, however, will discourage smokers of combustible cigarettes to switch to an alternative product. One source of confusion between traditional and electronic cigarettes involves the constituents in vapor. The accumulating evidence indicates electronic cigarettes may be safer because virtually none of the potentially harmful chemicals present in cigarette smoke are present in the vapor of electronic cigarettes. This year, Lorillard conducted its own study looking into the constituents of vapor. The analysis found that the harmful or potentially harmful constituents, HPHCs, found in the vapor were at or below detectable levels. As compared to combustible cigarettes, the reduction in these HPHC classes were at or near 100%, with the testing equipment's detection limits often being the only limiting factor for reaching 100%. Further, there was no difference between the ambient air compared to the vapor from electronic cigarettes. Lorillard plans to publish this study in 2014. FDA has announced it intends to assert authority. Lorillard stands ready to work with FDA to develop sensible regulations that encourage smokers to switch to e-cigarettes, sensible regulations that distinguish e-cigarettes from traditional tobacco products, and more importantly, sensible regulations that recognize e-cigarettes are likely the most significant tobacco harm reduction product ever.
Mike.
Last, do you mind if I close? I'm sorry for running over.
Quickly.
By extending this, as has been said before, you are giving no motivation for cigarette smokers to switch. Why would a cigarette smoker switch to an e-cigarette if they're going to go outside and smoke a regular cigarette? Why would they switch if they're going to be saddled with that same social stigma? I thank you for your time and attention to this, and I ask that you reject this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, members of the committee, my name is David Graham and I'm Senior Vice President for International Regulatory Affairs at Enjoy Electronic Cigarettes. Enjoy is America's #1 electronic cigarette company that's independent of the tobacco industry, and our mission is to obsolete the combustible cigarette. We are science-based, we're committed to act in the public health interest, and personally I have worked for over 20 years in the area of smoking cessation and tobacco control policy, and included within that work on 4 smoke-free policies at global, national and local levels. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. It's no doubt that the scientific base for restrictions on second-hand smoke from combustible tobacco cigarettes is unequivocal. In 1986, the Surgeon General's report concluded that second-hand smoke causes lung cancer. And later in 2006, the then Surgeon General, Dr. Carmona, released a follow-up report. And he said then, the debate is over. The science is clear. Second-hand smoke is not a mere annoyance, but a serious health hazard that causes premature death and disease in children and non-smoking adults. That was the basis of science under which policy such as the New York Smoke-Free Air Act was passed. And it was a leader in the world in establishing such science. Now, Dr. Carmona couldn't be present at this hearing today, but as chair of our Scientific Advisory Board, he asked me to submit his statement, which I've done to you today. And I quote one part from it. And quote, "I'm extremely concerned that a well-intentioned but scientifically unsupported effort like the current proposal could constitute a giant step backwards in the effort to defeat tobacco smoking." End quote. The fact of the matter is that the basis for the proposal to restrict the use of electronic cigarettes in public places has no comparable basis of fact to the basis of fact on which smoke-free law was established in the first place. Now, the other elements of the proposal include suggestions that there could be behavioural effects on smokers' behaviours. Consider the number of mays, mights, coulds in the proposal and in the testimony from the Commissioner today. We had no facts, we had no evidence, we only heard maybes. So let me give you a few alternative maybes. Maybe, potentially, e-cigarettes promote smokers' attempts to quit by making an alternative more convenient to use. They potentially discourage smokers from smoking amongst children and youth and ultimately reduce the number of people smoking. Enforcement is potentially easier because smokers have convenient alternatives. The confusion element for real cigarettes is implausible. There's no smell, and simple demonstration of a clean and cold tip by a user confirms it's a non-combustible product. So overall, simply put, the case has not been made that such a bill is in the public health interest. It is the potential to be quite the opposite. Restricting use of e-cigarettes could have the unintended effect of reinforcing combustion cigarette smoking in New York. We encourage the committee to ensure the policy is informed by and does not precede the relevant evidence. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Before the next speaker goes, we've been joined by Councilmember Dickens from the Health Committee as well. Thank you. Go ahead.
All right. Chair, thank you, Council, for listening to me today. My name is Jesse Gaddis, and I am the founder and creator of Bedford Slims, an electronic cigarette company found here in Brooklyn. I started Bedford Slims with the sole motivation of providing an accessible smoking alternative to my community in Brooklyn. As with all products with good intentions, my product has made its way all over the world and has helped thousands of people quit smoking and move on with their lives. But I'm not here really to talk about my company or anything from a company perspective. What I'm here to talk about today is the thousands of New Yorkers who rely on these things every day to get through their day, from riding the subway to their offices to going to the park with their children. This is what this is about for me. Let's see, where's my notes here? Secondhand smoke can travel up to 20 feet, whereas vapor, it's barely even there. It dissipates in the air. My thought today is more so on the facts that, lighting up a cigarette versus the regular e-cigarette is just completely different in every way, and I think it's kind of an absurd ruling to say cigarettes is comparable to, combustible cigarettes rather, are comparable to e-cigarettes. In May, I started a study with the Gibbs Mansion. For all of you who are not familiar with the Gibbs Mansion, it's a not-for-profit that helps people who are living with cancers, AIDS, severe mental health illnesses, and on top of that, they're homeless. So they're housed in this housing development near Pratt campus. And what they do essentially is they live in this house and they learn to normalize and live with all these problems. The biggest problem being here is that they all smoke cigarettes. So in May, I sponsored a study with Helen Redman and nurse Silka to see what the effects would be if they were to quit smoking, some of these residents, whoever wanted to take part in the study. And what we found with the study was essentially that not only was their lung improvement, lungs were improving and their breathing getting better, but overall what we were finding is even the nurses' aides were starting to feel better because there wasn't that secondhand smoke around anymore. What they were finding was that lung improvement was going from patient to nurse to anyone who's actually exposed to Gibbs Mansion. That said, about
Jesse, we forgot to set the clock, but we are paying attention.
Okay, so how much time do I have?
None. You're done.
Oh, no. Okay. Well, anyways, just to back up anything anymore, this doesn't... I think that denormalizing smoking has been helpful in many ways, but the facts are this isn't smoking. This is vapor. And what you're doing basically is denormalizing quitting, as Spike had said earlier. Alienating people and putting out this ban just adds more stress to the people who have found a way out of smoking. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Morning, members of the council. My name is David Schwartz, and I'm counsel to Logic, which is an independent e-cigarette company, and they have no tobacco affiliation whatsoever. And Logic supports the Smoke-Free Air Act as it regulates tobacco usage. Completely support it. In fact, that's the goal of the company, is to get people off tobacco. And so that's why we ask the question, how can a device that's been deemed by scientific studies to control tobacco usage be controlled the same way as tobacco? The long-term effects of electronic cigarettes and ingredients are not fully known at the moment, so passage of this bill would be completely premature. So these amendments would interfere with smokers' attempts to quit. The long-term effects of electronic cigarettes devises further study, and the FDA has yet to regulate it. So I'm not sure how we could classify electronic cigarettes the same way we classify regular cigarettes at the moment. You can't treat electronic cigarettes the same way as you treat tobacco. They're two inherently different products. And logic is not suggesting that there shouldn't be any regulation concerning e-cigarettes, but certainly it should be free from the type of regulation that cigarettes are regulated by. You should create regulations that are commensurate with the harm. Just because some people now find electronic cigarettes offensive, I'm not sure why. It's water vapor. We're trying to regulate water vapor. You know, you walk into a restaurant, maybe you don't like the smell of someone's perfume or the smell of cologne. Maybe you don't like the smell of broccoli. So maybe we should regulate that. You do? Oh, you don't. I don't either, Chairman Arroyo. So maybe we should regulate broccoli. You know, this is where government, you know, interferes with private industry and the rights of electronic smokers. Electronic cigarettes encourages growth. I've been in front of this council before talking about small business issues. And look at some of the small businesses. Well, we have large businesses, and we also have small businesses that are involved in electronic cigarettes. And certainly the retailers are small businesses living the American dream and, again, being interfered with or potentially being interfered with by legislation which will devastate those businesses and the sales of electronic cigarettes, where the mission would be to get people to stop smoking. So it's really, the bill is really counterintuitive. The vapor from electronic cigarettes has no smell that affects other patrons or employees in any establishment. In a study conducted by Professor Burstein of Drexel University School of Public Health, I just finished. He concluded that claims regarding chemicals found in e-cigarettes vapor were detected only in trivial levels that pose no health risk and are far below current workplace standards for involuntary exposure. I thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony, and we'll see you again at some other point on some other issue. It's always a pleasure to see you guys here.
Thank you.
No questions? One. Okay.
Just quickly, that was an actual toke you took when exhaled the vapor that we couldn't see?
That was a drug, yeah.
See, and that's much less vapor than I saw in the back. So I'm still trying to learn, why is that? Did different cigarettes give out different vapors?
Yes, absolutely. These are more of the cig-alikes. So they're designed more to kind of have the feel and handle of one, of like an actual cigarette. However, a lot of these devices that you might see around the plumes of smoke are modular devices or bigger battery devices which will give you a bigger plume of smoke. I don't want to say that there's a huge difference in terms of delivery, but you can see that there's a bigger cloud of smoke with a bigger battery, obviously. Vape.
See, I'm not the only one who said smoke.
May I answer it as well? So what he's talking about, these are the more of the disposable, the closed systems type of devices. What you're seeing back there are more the open systems. They have much larger batteries in which you add the flavor yourself.
But they look less like cigarettes, I would guess.
Right, but this has, for example, ours is blue, and you can see why when I do this. It has a blue light. Clearly, it can't be confused with a cigarette, and that's the point of this. And one last point. We talk about denormalizing smoking. This is one of the greatest inventions to denormalize smoking. You can see it with these people here that they do not consider themselves smokers. They're very proud that they have been able to move over to e-cigarettes to either reduce the amount of smoking that they're doing or completely replace it, and in some instances completely stopping both smoking cigarettes and vaping.
Okay, last question. You said it's not scented. It clearly is. They sell it in scents. I smelled it. I've smelled it before. So I assume there's different kinds of smoke you're talking about, but I don't think it helps your case to say the smoke doesn't smell.
Well, certainly most of
Vapor.
most of the brands that Logic smells are not scented. I can't smell what he's smoking right now. And part of my testimony, Councilman Vallone, was that maybe there should be reasonable regulation. Maybe we should all sit down and work out reasonable regulation. But the point is, should it be regulated to the level of cigarettes?
No, I agree with you
completely. And maybe your point on flavors is valid.
Maybe flavors, maybe sizes, maybe not looking like a regular cigarette, maybe locations. I'm trying to come up with something here, but that was I wrote down reasonable regulations when you said it.
If I could just add one more thing, I think the rush to a vote on the 19th is really premature. Why don't we all sit down and work this out? That's my point. There's just it seems to be such a rush to get this vote, to do this hearing, and when the effects are just not known at this point. Let's all sit down and work out something reasonable.
Well, you have a political reality here at the end of a term coming up, and you've got some good people like Chairman Gennaro, who's been leading the way on many health regulations, and the mayor, who's been stellar when it comes to smoking, leaving office, and it's just something you're up against. I don't think you're going to. You've been involved in this a long time, so you understand that. And every time I say I smell the smoke, I do want to point out I know a lot of vapors, and they purposely don't smoke in restaurants because they're civil and they understand people don't want to smell vanilla or rose or whatever the heck it is in a restaurant either. So I just want to say I'm not inundated with these things at restaurants. I'm just pointing that out as a possibility because most of the people who vape that I know are very respectful.
Councilmember Rose?
Yes. E-cigarettes are marketed as a nicotine delivery system. Is the nicotine level that's being delivered, is it addictive?
Madam, nicotine itself is addictive. Anyone that uses e-cigarettes is already addicted to nicotine, and therefore they may transfer their usage from one product to the other. We don't see evidence of people becoming primarily addicted to e-cigarettes at this stage.
The fear that I heard from the commissioner was that young people might begin to use these because it looks socially acceptable. He felt that they look like regular cigarettes. So if a young person was a non-smoker and picked up an e-cigarette, would they become addicted to nicotine, to smoking?
There's no evidence to demonstrate that. And if there were, then action may have to be taken. But in the absence of evidence, there's no basis of action.
I totally agree with Councilmember Gentile that, again, one of the concerns of the commissioner was that the e-cigarettes look like regular cigarettes, combustible cigarettes. Would the industry be adverse to changing what they look like to ensure that they did not look like cigarettes, therefore removing the desire of young people to emulate cigarette smokers?
I can't speak for the industry, but I'll speak on behalf of Blue Ecigs. And as I said, we have almost about 49% of the retail market share in the country. This clearly does not look like a cigarette, a combustible cigarette. It was intentionally designed so it would not look like a cigarette.
Doesn't it look like one of those little cigarillo sort of things, like a Moor or something?
That's the whole point of the
I'm
blue.
visually challenged, so I can't see what that looks like from here.
That's purposely a blue tip. not a
Excuse
red.
me?
It's purposely a blue tip, not a red
Okay.
tip, to signal that this is not a cigarette.
Okay. So I guess, no, you couldn't speak on behalf of the industry if one of the points is that they look like cigarettes, that all of them be made to conform to something that does not look like a cigarette, and be marketed as such, as a non-cigarette.
I speak on behalf of Enjoy, and Enjoy deliberately designs its product to look and feel like a cigarette. We do that because we know that in order to obsolete the cigarette, many smokers will find it easier to make a transition from their current product to an alternative when it comes closer to their preference. So by denying the opportunity for a product to appeal to the appeal of smokers, essentially you may not meet their needs and they'll continue to smoke. My colleague on the right is owned by a tobacco company. Having a product that doesn't look like a cigarette is a business decision that they have made. We have no conflict inside Enjoy in that our primary mission is to obsolete the tobacco cigarette. We believe by offering a product that truly and directly competes with it and looks like it, offers the smoker the real potential to switch to that.
On behalf of Logic, I can't comment on that exact question, the design, but certainly Logic is happy to sit down with anyone to discuss any types of concerns and regulations. What we are afraid of is legislation being passed based on speculation and guesswork.
Thank you.
Again, thank you for your time and for your input. We value it tremendously. The next panel, Kevin O'Flaherty, Michael Sailbeck, and Sheila Feinberg. Batting up.
No, there's two more.
Two more? Oh, sorry. Okay. Karen Bloomfield and Kara Murphy. And now, batting up, Andrew Weegee, Rob Bookman, and Thomas Bryant. That's the next panel, yes. That's crowded.